When you open your phone and go online, it doesn't just feel like you're checking a tool. It feels like you're stepping into a living weather system of people and reactions and trends that somehow already knows you. Your feed bends around your interests. Ads chase you across websites. You type one search, and millions of machines across the planet silently rearrange themselves to answer you in a fraction of a second. In those moments, are you just using a network, or are you participating in something that's starting to feel uncomfortably like a mind? That's our question. Not just could machines become conscious one day, the usual sci-fi singularity story, but something stranger. What if, without any single dramatic breakthrough, Earth as a whole is quietly turning into a kind of thinking system? A mind that spans continents, data centers, forests, oceans, and billions of human beings. An even weirder possibility, what if it already has? Let's start with a thought experiment. Imagine, just for a moment, that Earth could say one sentence to humanity right now. One sentence only. What do you think it would be? Would it be something like, slow down, you're heating my skin? Or, you are part of me, stop acting like you're not? Or maybe something terrifyingly indifferent, like, you are a brief phase in my metabolism. Whatever sentence you imagine, notice what it assumes. For Earth to say anything at all, it would need a few ingredients we normally associate with minds. It would need integration, the ability to pull information together from many places. It would need memory, a way to compare what's happening now with what's happened before. And it would need some sort of self-model, a rough internal picture of itself, so it can say I or me in a meaningful way. Those are the same ingredients we point to when we talk about individual minds. So here's our puzzle. We know how to talk about your mind, or mine. We're starting to know how to talk about the minds of animals, and maybe, soon, advanced artificial systems. But what happens if we take those same scientific tools and point them upward, at the scale of an entire planet? In most popular stories, the singularity is loud. It's a moment, a lab somewhere turns on the first superhuman AI, the graphs all go vertical, the world changes overnight. One machine, one breakthrough, one spectacular awakening. But there's another possibility. A quiet singularity. Not a single AI god appearing in a server rack, but intelligence slowly diffusing across the whole planetary system. Humans, machines, ecosystems, cities, markets, satellites, all knitting together into something that thinks, without any one instant where we can say, that's when it woke up. So here is our central question for this journey. Is Earth already functioning as a single, giant mind, and are we just too close, too embedded inside it, to see it clearly? To even attempt to answer that, we have to slow down and ask, what is a mind, scientifically? Stripped of all poetry, one way cognitive science describes a mind is a network that processes information in a way that's both flexible and integrated. Take your brain. It's about 86 billion neurons, tiny cells that send electrical and chemical signals to each other. No single neuron knows your favorite song or your earliest memory. Each is like a small, simple device, mostly aware only of its neighbors. But when they're connected in the right patterns, with constant feedback loops, bursts of activity, and changing connections, something new appears: thoughts, feelings, a sense of self. Neuroscientists sometimes call this emergence. It's like how a single water molecule can't be wet, but a huge crowd of them, interacting, gives rise to the property we call wetness. Minds, in this view, are what happen when information isn't just flowing, but deeply entangled across a network. One of the more ambitious attempts to formalize this is something called integrated information theory, or IIT. Jargon-wise, it sounds intimidating, but the core idea can be captured with a metaphor. Imagine a library. You can have 1 million books, that's a lot of information, but if all the books are in random languages, scattered, and no one ever cross-references anything, you don't get a coherent story. That's lots of information, but not integrated information. IIT says a system is conscious, not just intelligent, but conscious, to the extent that it does two things at once. First, it differentiates. It can be in many distinct states, like a library with many possible books and topics. Second, it unifies. Those states are so interconnected that you can't pull the system apart without losing something essential about what it's currently experiencing. There isn't a neat way to carve it into independent pieces without destroying its story of the moment. Think of it like a tapestry. You can't cut it into squares and keep the picture. IIT tries to quantify this with a number called phi, which, roughly, measures how much a system is more than the sum of its parts. High phi means the system's current state can't be reduced to independent components acting in isolation. Everything is informing everything else. There's another model that complements this called the global workspace theory. Here, consciousness is compared to a theater. Most of the brain is backstage, unconscious processes, routines, pattern detectors quietly doing their thing. But there's a spotlight on the stage. Whatever information wins the battle to step into that spotlight gets broadcast to the rest of the brain. That broadcast, where many subsystems suddenly start referencing the same thing, is what we experience as something being in our awareness. So when you feel a sudden flash of insight, or the sting of embarrassment, or the awareness of an itch on your arm, those are like scenes that made it into the global workspace, taking center stage. Why does any of this matter for a planetary mind? Because both of these frameworks, IIT and global workspace, tell us to look for the same ingredients: widespread information sharing, tight integration, and some arena where certain signals get amplified to the whole system. They also remind us that minds can be emergent. A single neuron can't be happy or jealous. Happiness and jealousy are properties that exist only when huge numbers of neurons interact in a particular configuration. It's the pattern that matters more than the parts. And crucially, scale doesn't matter in principle. There's nothing in these theories that says this only works for brains that fit inside a skull. What matters is connectivity, feedback, and integration. In fact, we already have examples of minds, of a sort, that stretch beyond individual bodies. Consider an ant colony. A single ant is not very smart. It follows simple rules: follow this chemical trail, avoid that smell, carry food back if you find it. But put tens of thousands of ants together, and suddenly the colony can solve surprisingly complex problems, finding the shortest path to a food source, regulating temperature, defending itself in coordinated ways. The colony becomes a kind of superorganism, a mind made of many bodies. Or think of a beehive. No single bee has a map of all the flowers in the region. But through waggle dances and chemical signals, the hive collectively allocates foragers, shifts strategies when a patch runs out, and even decides when to split and swarm. Again, intelligence emerges from simple units interacting via feedback loops. Even the flocking of birds, those mesmerizing murmurations of starlings, shows how local rules can create global patterns that seem to think about predators and obstacles, without any central controller. So when we ask, could Earth have a mind? We're not asking whether there's a secret brain hidden under the crust. We're asking whether the entire web of interactions, between living things, climate systems, human societies, and technologies, could add up to something that behaves mind-like. To see how far this idea already goes in mainstream science, we need to talk about Gaia. The Gaia hypothesis, introduced in the 1970s by James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis, is often misunderstood as Earth is literally a goddess. But the scientific version is more grounded and, in some ways, more astonishing. It proposes that Earth's biosphere, the totality of life, interacts with the atmosphere, oceans, and rocks to form feedback loops that help maintain conditions suitable for life. In simpler terms, life doesn't just adapt to the environment, it helps create and stabilize the environment. For example, tiny ocean organisms called plankton release compounds that can seed clouds. More plankton can mean more clouds. More clouds can reflect more sunlight, cooling the surface, which in turn affects where plankton thrive. That's a feedback loop linking biology, chemistry, and climate. Forests evaporate water through their leaves, effectively pumping moisture into the air. Large forests can influence regional rainfall patterns, which then affect where forests can exist. Another feedback loop. And the slow weathering of rocks, a geochemical process, helps regulate carbon dioxide over millions of years, stabilizing Earth's temperature within a range where liquid water, and thus life, can persist. None of these loops require consciousness. Gaia, as regulation, doesn't imply Gaia, as a thinking being. But you can feel the pieces assembling: sensors, organisms that respond to conditions, actuators, processes that change those conditions, and cycles of feedback that keep the system within certain bounds. It starts to look less like a passive stage where life plays out, and more like a vast, cybernetic control system. Now add one more layer: us. Human beings have created a new planetary layer some scientists call the technosphere. This includes everything humans build and use that processes matter, energy, and information, roads, cities, power grids, fiber optic cables, satellites, server farms, smartphones, algorithms. Taken together, this technosphere is starting to look suspiciously like a nervous system wrapped around the planet. Data flows through undersea cables and microwave towers the way signals flow along nerves. Energy grids route power like blood vessels routing nutrients. Social media platforms and search engines act like giant pattern detectors, constantly scanning what billions of humans are paying attention to. Just to get a sense of scale, there are now tens of billions of network devices on Earth, more than the number of neurons in a typical human brain, though of course the comparison is rough. Neurons fire hundreds of times per second, while your phone might send only a few messages per minute. But in terms of raw counts and potential connections, we're building something staggering. We can watch emergent behaviors at this global scale. Financial markets, connected by high-speed networks, collectively respond to news in minutes. A rumor or a meme can spread across continents in hours. During a pandemic, researchers on different continents share genomic data, models, and results so quickly that vaccines go from concept to mass deployment in under a year, a planetary-scale learning process. No one is in full control of any of this. Yet patterns emerge, strategies form, and the system as a whole reacts to shocks, albeit imperfectly. There's a term some thinkers use for this vision: the global brain. A planet-wide network where humans, machines, and institutions together behave like a single information processing system. But there's a big leap between a global brain-like network and a global mind. So let's stress test the idea. If we take something like integrated information theory seriously, does Earth meet any of the criteria for a mind? Under IIT, the key question is, how tightly integrated is the system? Do Earth's subsystems, biosphere, human societies, digital networks, form a web where the overall state can't be broken into independent pieces without losing what it is right now? Some parts of Earth are loosely coupled. What happens in one remote valley might have almost no immediate effect on another far-off region. But other parts are very tightly linked. A financial decision in one country can ripple through markets worldwide. A factory shutting down in one region can disrupt supply chains thousands of kilometers away. Climate is globally integrated. CO2 released in one city affects temperatures everywhere. The internet knits together billions of people into a rapidly adjusting information web. If you tried to cut the system into separate chunks, say, disconnect all undersea cables, or isolate large populations, you wouldn't just get smaller copies of the same global state. You'd fundamentally change what kinds of patterns can exist at all. That's one hint of integration. IIT would ask, at what scale does integration peak? Is the most integrated system your individual brain? Or is it a couple, two people deeply connected? A city? A nation? Or could it be, eventually, the entire planet? We don't currently have the tools to compute something like phi for Earth. But we can at least recognize the direction: denser connections, faster feedback, more systems depending on and influencing each other. Here's a thought experiment to sharpen this. Consider a single neuron in your brain. That neuron has no idea that you exist. It doesn't know your name, your hopes, your sense of humor. It only knows the chemical signals from its neighbors and the electrochemical rules that tell it when to fire. Yet, from your point of view, that neuron is part of you. Its tiny contribution is woven into the thoughts and experiences that make up your mind. And the neuron never gets to step outside and confirm this. It's forever inside the system. Now let's flip that perspective. What if each of us is, in some sense, like a neuron in a larger planetary brain? We go about our lives, following local rules. We post, we vote, we buy, we build, we talk, we learn. We rarely see more than a tiny slice of the whole. But in aggregate, our local decisions might be implementing something like Earth-scale cognition. If you were a neuron, what experiments could you possibly run, from the inside, to detect your host's mind? You might look at the patterns of signals around you. Are they random, or is there structure, memory, direction? Do local events reliably contribute to larger waves of activity that seem to carry information across the system? That's exactly the kind of question we're starting to ask about our own networks. When billions of people change their behavior in response to a piece of information, a scientific paper, a viral video, a climate report, is that noise, or is it analogous to a thought forming and spreading through a brain-like structure? There's another wrinkle we have to consider: timescale. Your conscious thoughts operate on the order of hundreds of milliseconds. A flash of recognition, a word forming on your tongue, a decision to move your hand, these are quick. Planetary processes are slow. Climate feedbacks play out over decades. Cultural shifts might take generations. Evolution unfolds over millions of years. So if there were something like a thought on the scale of a planetary mind, it might look like a century-long course correction. For example, the global recognition of climate change, followed by decades of argument, policy shifts, technological innovation, and eventually, if we succeed, a large-scale decarbonization of energy and industry. From the inside, that feels like politics and economics and activism and denial and innovation and protest. It feels messy, contested, often frustratingly slow. From the outside, if there were an outside observer watching Earth like a single organism, it might look like a homeostatic response, a hot-blooded creature realizing it has a fever and gradually changing its behavior to cool down. That's the paradox. Inside a system, individual agents experience personal motives and local conflicts. Viewed from far enough away, those same events can look like the coordinated response of a single entity. Now we add one more accelerant to this picture: artificial intelligence and digital automation. If the biosphere is Earth's body, and human culture, language, institutions, trade, is its nervous system, then our emerging AI systems might be forming something like a cortex. In your brain, the cortex is the folded outer layer heavily involved in abstract thinking, planning, and modeling. It doesn't just react, it simulates possible futures. Today, we have language models that can summarize the world's text, search engines that scan billions of pages in milliseconds, recommendation systems that steer attention at planetary scale. None of these on their own are the mind of Earth. But collectively, they might be creating a kind of global workspace. Ideas, narratives, and fears compete for visibility on social platforms and news feeds. Those that would shape not just conversation, but policy, investment, and behavior worldwide. Seen through this lens, your attention is like a tiny beam of that planetary spotlight. What you click, share, and argue about affects which patterns get amplified into the global workspace and which fade into the noise. If that's even partly true, then AI isn't an alien mind about to descend on us from the cloud. It's more like a new, rapidly growing lobe of a mind we're already embedded in and helping to train. At this point, a scientifically healthy skepticism kicks in. How would we even know if Earth had anything like consciousness? Right now, we don't have a universally accepted way to measure consciousness even in simpler animals, let alone in a planet. We can propose candidate proxies, complexity metrics that track how interdependent different parts of Earth's system are. Network integration measures that quantify how quickly and coherently information propagates through global infrastructures. Observations of global responsiveness, how the whole system reacts to perturbations like pandemics, climate shocks, or technological disruptions. But there's a gap between poetic metaphor and testable hypothesis. Saying Earth is having a fever is a metaphor for climate change. It's useful if it helps us grasp the seriousness of the situation and galvanize action. It becomes science when we can connect those metaphors to specific, measurable feedback mechanisms and predictive models. So we need epistemic humility here. We don't know how to compute Earth's phi. We don't know whether any large-scale integration crosses the threshold into what we'd call consciousness. On the Science Audit, our job isn't to declare, yes, Earth is definitely a mind, or, no, that's ridiculous. Our job is to stress test the idea, to see how far it holds under scrutiny, and what it reveals even if the literal claim turns out false. Because even if Earth is not conscious, modeling it as if it were can change how we see ourselves. So let's run another experiment, this time on your sense of identity. For a moment, imagine you're not an isolated individual. You're a cell in a larger cognitive organism. You still have your own experiences, your own inner life, but you're also part of a vast, overlapping metabolism of information and matter. You feel this sometimes, don't you? That sensation of being swept up in something larger than yourself. A protest, a concert, a social media storm, a collective panic, or a collective joy. It's as if the emotional weather around you changes, and your own feelings snap into alignment with it. From one angle, that's just social psychology. From another, it's what it feels like when a bigger-than-individual pattern passes through the human layer of a planetary system. If you are part of a planetary mind, does that diminish your individuality, Or place it in a larger context? A single neuron is unimaginably insignificant compared to the whole brain. Yet its role is not meaningless. Change enough neurons, and you can alter a personality, a memory, a decision. Likewise, your actions, your words, your work, your kindness or cruelty are tiny, but they're ingredients in whatever large-scale patterns emerge. That reframing leads to a different kind of ethics. If we're like neurons with agency, then our choices are literally shaping the thoughts Earth can think. Every policy debate, every new technology, every cultural shift is not just about winners and losers. It's about modifying the planetary pattern of information flow and feedback. Climate action, under this lens, becomes the planetary mind trying to regulate its own temperature, using us as the mechanism. Some parts of the system push for more fossil fuels. Others push for renewables and reforestation. The outcome isn't just a political victory, it's a change in how the whole system responds to energy and heat. So instead of only asking, what's good for me? Or what's good for my country, my species? We can add another question. What kind of mind are we helping this planet become? A mind that burns through its own foundations in a burst of short-sighted consumption? Or a mind that integrates, reflects, stabilizes, and maybe even flourishes for a long time? If we zoom out still further, this line of thought reaches into the cosmos. If Earth can function even partially like a mind, then maybe mind-like planets are not unique. Perhaps any world with life and technology goes through some version of this quiet singularity, where intelligence spreads through the biosphere and technosphere until the whole system behaves like a unified learner. This has implications for the Fermi paradox, the question of why, in a vast universe, we don't see obvious signs of other civilizations. One possibility is that advanced civilizations tend to broadcast loudly, radio beacons, megastructures, cosmic engineering. Another is that, as they mature, they turn inward. Their peak intelligence is focused on maintaining and exploring rich inner worlds, planetary or even larger minds, that don't produce easy-to-spot external signatures. If two such planet minds ever did communicate, their conversation might unfold on timescales that make our entire history look like a brief greeting. A single question could be 1,000 years of subtle modulation in a star's light. A single answer could be a reshaping of a biosphere over geological ages. It's speculative, but it reframes our loneliness. Maybe the universe isn't silent. Maybe it's thinking on a scale and in a language we're not yet equipped to recognize. So where does all this leave us? We've wandered from neurons to ant colonies, from Gaia to the technosphere, from cognition models to cosmic speculation. Along the way, we've pushed on a single, strange idea, that Earth might be, or might be becoming, a kind of mind. We don't yet know whether that's literally true. We don't know how to pin down planetary consciousness with measurements, equations, and experiments. It may turn out that integration at this scale never crosses the threshold into what we'd intuitively call awareness. But even if the answer is no, living inside this question changes how we see things. Seeing Earth as a mind-like system sharpens our understanding of ecosystems, of networks, of ourselves. It reminds us that our personal dramas are simultaneously tiny and woven into something vast. So here's the synthesis. A mind, in the scientific sense, is not magic. It's what happens when information circulates through a system that's both richly differentiated and tightly integrated. Your brain is one example. An ant colony is another, in a looser way. Earth already behaves like a giant regulatory organism through Gaia-like feedback loops. On top of that, our global networks and AI systems are rapidly increasing the density and speed of information flow. Put those pieces together, and we get the idea of a quiet singularity, not an explosive birth of a single superintelligent machine, but a gradual, almost invisible transition where the planet's biosphere, technosphere, and human societies collectively start to resemble a unified cognitive system. There may be no day it woke up, only a long, fuzzy emergence. We don't know if Earth is conscious. But treating it as a possible mind forces us to confront our role as components of that system, and to ask what patterns of thought and behavior we're amplifying. Here's the contemplative takeaway, the thought experiment I want you to carry with you. Tomorrow, as you go through your day, notice how many times you interface with something larger than yourself. When you log on and scroll, imagine you're watching tiny flashes of a planetary cortex. When you commute through a city, imagine you're moving through the tangled wiring of a global nervous system. When you feel climate anxiety, imagine that as a signal, a symptom of a system sensing that something is off. Then ask yourself, in each of those moments, am I just living my life, or am I helping a planet think? What thought am I contributing to? A thought of extraction, division, and short-term gain? Or a thought of repair, integration, and long-term flourishing? That's not mysticism. It's an invitation to recognize that your actions ripple outward, through networks and ecosystems and generations. You are local, but you are not alone. And finally, the next great question, because every good answer should open a new door. If Earth is even a little bit like a mind, and if our technologies are rapidly rewiring that mind, what responsibility do we have to design those technologies not just to serve us, but to serve the long-term health and character of the planet's cognition? Or in a more intimate form, if the self you experience is already an illusion built from billions of cells, what happens to that self when you realize you might also be a cell in something larger? And if time itself, at the fundamental level, turns out to be more of an emergent construct than a basic ingredient of reality, if our sense of past and future is a story our minds tell, what does that say about the memories we hold most dear, and the futures we're capable of imagining together? In the comments, I'd love to hear where you land on this. Do you feel more like an individual in a crowd, or a neuron in a brain? What experiences in your own life have made you feel most connected to, or separate from, this larger system we call Earth? And if you want to keep exploring this paradox, we've got episodes diving deeper into consciousness, complexity, and AI, the building blocks of this whole planetary mind idea. Because on the Science Audit, we're not just chasing the right answers, we're learning how to live inside better questions.